In the past year, numerous planning applications have been approved for halls in Cardiff city centre. Alongside this, a report by Cardiff Council last year found that 41% of student housing in Cardiff fell below standards. Sarah Merry talked about the drawbacks of student housing.
If a landlord has put more students into a property than they can cope with in terms of waste storage, storing bikes, parking, simply in terms of actually the noise generated by just 12 people in a house living their lives normally. That's very different to a family home. And there's lots of good landlords, and I would say there are lots of landlords who are simply keen to maximise the amount of profit they can make from their houses, and they care little for the condition of the houses, and that impacts on both the students living in them and on the neighbouring properties. And there does seem to be evidence that some students do prefer the halls, but there will also always be students who want to be living out of hall. And I think part of that driver will become, and all accommodation costs are a big issue for students, but actually halls are expensive compared to privately rented accommodation. I think there will always be a demand there.
Luke Edmonds has worked at the Liberty Gardens site in Cardiff, formerly known as Student Castle, for 3 years now. He talked about the advantages of living in halls.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that it's becoming more and more popular. People have been coming out from the houses, the student houses, and inquiring into accommodation, like private accommodation, quite a lot more recently. Obviously with Cathays, there's thousands and thousands of students living in houses, but a lot of them are coming out now and coming into the private accommodation. Well, I guess some students, they like to have all their bills included to make things a bit easier to organise. Security is another thing as well, because there is crime that happens in the student housing areas because it's not as monitored. There's no security like there is in a place like this. I guess initially, but when they sort of sit down and look at all the costs of how much it is to pay their gas, their internet, their electricity, all that sort of thing, once you've sort of got an estimate of how much that's going to cost and you've put it all together, then it sort of seems a bit more reasonable. But at face value, I guess £120 a week does seem expensive at first sight.
While some students prefer halls, others choose to move into housing. Chelsea Davison talked about her experience of living in a student house.
We've been alright because we've had quite good landlords, but I'd say, are in a higher price range of student housing than most people. So I know people who've had lots of issues with mould, which we've never had that. Slugs. Someone had a pipe burst under her floor, so that was what was dragging all the slugs in, and her floorboards started rotting and she had no clue, and it took a while for it to it's just sort of how quick landlords fix problems. Ours is quite quick and on it because he personally owns the houses, whereas if you're sort of if you're renting it through someone who's renting it for someone else, it can get a bit quicker to solve the issue because they're sort of deciding whose responsibility it is to fix the issue. Ours has worked out to be cheaper, and we're on a higher budget student house than most people, paying for that security that's made it an enjoyable experience. But it sort of depends. You've got to keep an eye on the bills. So we're quite cautious, like using water and showers and things, and like heating. Whereas we know people who've had lots of surprise bills where they've accidentally had the boiler on all the time, not realising, thinking it was on eco, and they've had like a stupid bill to pay at the end. But overall, I think it works. Even with the 2 extra months, it works out to be about a couple £100 cheaper.
There are many pros and cons to student housing, but who knows what could happen along the road.